Coming up today, President Park Geun-hye is set for a busy few days, drumming up international support for a tough response to North Korea's recent provocations. She'll meet with the leaders of the United States, China and Japan in Washington. A senior U.S. official says China should use its influence over North Korea to put it on the right track or drop its objections to the planned deployment of a U.S. missile defense system to South Korea. First, overseas Koreans begin casting their ballots for the April 13th general election. The official campaigning period in Korea begins on Thursday. Stay tuned for these stories and more. Hello, it's noon on Wednesday, the 30th of March. You're tuned in to our midday newscast here on Arirang TV. Thank you ever so much for joining us. I'm Mark Broom. Our top story this afternoon, President Park Geun-hye is preparing to leave for Washington in the next couple of hours to attend the fourth and final Nuclear Security Summit. A series of sideline talks with other world leaders are also on the president's to-do list as Seoul seeks to up the pressure on North Korea following its recent provocations. Our Song Ji-sun starts us off.
President Park Geun-hye is set to embark on an 8-day trip to Washington and Mexico City. When she lands in the U.S. Capitol, she will have a busy day ahead of her on Thursday, starting off with summit talks with U.S. President Barack Obama. Trilateral talks with Obama and Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe will follow, with all three leaders discussing countermeasures and sanctions on North Korea's nuclear aggression. After that, President Park and Abe will hold a one-on-one session. President Park is set to then meet Chinese President Xi Jinping for an in-depth conversation on North Korea. At a plenary session of the Nuclear Security Summit on Friday, 50-plus state representatives will assess their achievements since the last summit in 2014 and adopt a joint communique for increased nuclear security. President Park's focus will shift to business when she jets off to Mexico City on Saturday, flanked by a delegation of 145 South Korean businessmen. Seoul is seeking to expand its presence in Mexico's infrastructure and development projects and lock down greater business opportunities through the Korea-Mexico Business Forum and direct consultations with Mexican buyers. Before flying home, President Park will invite Korean residents in Mexico to a dinner. A cultural event promoting the Korean Wave, or Hallyu, is also on her schedule. Song Ji-sun, Arirang News.
Now, the United States says it'll have no choice but to deploy an advanced missile defense system to the Korean peninsula if North Korea does not change its aggressive and unpredictable behavior. Washington also wants China to use its unique position to tighten the screw on its longtime ally. Kim Hyun-bin with the details.
A senior U.S. diplomat said the missile defense system known as THAAD is necessary to protect U.S. interests and its regional allies from North Korea. Speaking at the Brookings Institution in Washington on Tuesday, U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Tony Blinken said deployment of the THAAD system will put real pressure on North Korea to denuclearize. He also called for China's cooperation on the matter and said Beijing should use its unique relationship with the North to nudge the regime in the right direction. Otherwise, they'll have to accept that Seoul and Washington need an extra layer of security against Pyongyang's threats.
We've encouraged China to contribute more, to apply its significant capabilities as a rising economic and political power to help meet the needs in the international community, from peacekeeping to public health.
The remarks come ahead of Chinese President Xi Jinping's trip to Washington for a nuclear security summit on Thursday, where North Korea is expected to be high on the agenda. China is against THAAD deployment to South Korea, as the radar has a range that extends into Chinese territory. Blinken emphasized that the system is not directed against China, and said that Washington is ready to brief Beijing on the technical specifications at any time. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
North Korea seems to be making progress toward development of a solid-fuel rocket motor, raising speculation the regime could be developing a two-stage missile. US-based North Korea monitoring website 38 North said a test shown in recent images from North Korea of a large solid fuel rocket motor appears to have been real and successful. The site says, however, the new engine appears too heavy to use on any of its existing missiles, and a more likely role for the motor is as the upper stage of a solid fuel replacement for its mid-range Nodong ballistic missile. The website speculates the North could be building a two-stage solid fuel missile. However, it also says the North would not be expected to complete deployment of one of those kinds of missiles before the year 2019. Now, South Koreans dotted around the world have already begun casting their ballots for the April 13th general election. Over 150,000 overseas Koreans have registered to exercise their democratic right. Park Ji-won has this report.
Overseas voting for this year's general election began at Korea's consulate in Auckland, New Zealand at 4 a.m. Korea time on Wednesday. Voting will continue through the end of next Monday at 198 polling stations in 113 countries around the world. Korea's National Election Commission says almost 155,000 people, or nearly 8% of some 2 million eligible citizens living abroad, have registered to vote. Nearly 25% of the registered voters are in the U.S., 19% are in Japan, and 14% in China. Koreans will be able to cast their ballots between 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. every day during the 6-day vote period, and that includes weekends. Registered voters are required to carry a valid ID with a photo, such as a passport or a resident registration card, and can vote in any country where voting stations are available. Those who have secured permanent residence in other countries need to additionally bring their certificates to prove their resident status. Overseas voters with resident status in Korea can cast their ballots for both local constituencies and proportional seats, but those who have not maintained their resident status in Korea can only vote for proportional seats. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
Now, the candidates running in this year's general election are gearing up for the official start of the 13-day campaign period, which starts at the stroke of midnight tonight. There are 944 men and women running in 253 districts for the election on April 13th. Both the candidates and their supporters can use social media, text messages and phone calls to get their message out, in addition to making in-person appearances and public speeches. However, the candidates must abide by a set of guidelines issued by the National Election Commission that say all campaign activities must end 24 hours before election day. Federal Reserve Chair Janet Yellen has insisted the U.S. Central Bank will move cautiously when it comes to further rate hikes. Yellen said it was appropriate to adjust the rate policy carefully, a remark consistent with the Fed's previous position that was revealed in mid-March. Park Jong-hong reports.
Federal Reserve Chief Janet Yellen has reiterated caution in hiking U.S. rates. Giving a speech at the Economic Club of New York on Tuesday, Yellen said it was appropriate to adjust the rate policy carefully, as inflation has not yet proven durable against the backdrop of global risks to the U.S. economy.
Given the risk to the outlook, I consider it appropriate for the committee to proceed cautiously in adjusting policy.
Her remarks come 2 weeks after the Fed decided to hold benchmark interest rates steady. At its March policy meeting, the U.S. Central Bank had pointed to an overseas slowdown and early-year market turmoil as reasons for the pause. On Tuesday, Yellen said the risks of premature rate hikes and derailing growth outweigh the hazards of needing to catch up to a stronger-than-expected economy. She added that the Fed still expected headwinds, such as weak growth overseas and low oil prices, to subside slightly and allow the recovery to continue. Meanwhile, the Fed chief called economic reports this year, quote, somewhat mixed, noting that strength in the U.S. labor market, consumer spending, and housing had offset a sluggish global economy and depressed crude prices. The decent U.S. economic data had prompted some other Fed officials to suggest another rate hike could be possible in April or June. Park Jong-hong, Arirang News.
Now, Korea is the biggest exporter to China, but a new report points out that it must try to export more consumer goods to its neighbouring nation. According to a monthly report released by the Export-Import Bank of Korea, Korea topped other countries with $190 billion worth of shipments to China in 2014. Followed by Japan and the United States. However, the consumer goods accounted for just 3.7% of Korea's total shipments to China. The report says that compared to other advanced countries, Korea is far more dependent on semi-finished goods in trade with China, which made up almost 80% of its total exports. It added that in order to improve the long-standing imbalance and to gain a share in China's rapidly expanding consumer goods market, Korea needs to export more consumer goods such as cosmetics and home appliances to the world's second biggest economy. The global mobile phone market has shrunk for the first time in 2.5 years. This is according to Strategy Analytics, which revealed that in the fourth quarter of 2015 there was a 1% contraction compared to the previous quarter. This was due to the uptake of smartphones failing to keep up with the falling number of feature phones around the world. And although smartphone sales are slowing, they're still relatively healthy, posting 12% growth on year. Strategy Analytics also confirmed that while Apple has the highest earnings, Samsung Electronics sells the most phones, and together they hold a whopping 2/3 of the entire global market. The number of workers in Korea's finance sector has dropped to its lowest level in 6 years. According to Statistics Korea, there were just over 780,000 people working in finance last month. That's a 12% decrease from its peak of 890,000 3 years ago. Last year alone, it fell almost 6%, and that goes against the rest of Korea's jobs market, which saw an overall increase of 1%. Now, investment banks around the world have been reducing their workforce since the global financial crisis in 2008. Close to 100,000 people were laid off from US and European banks last year alone. Ultra-low interest rates and the increasing use of artificial intelligence in asset management have been aggravating the problem in recent years. Now, there are fresh concerns about airport security in Egypt following the hijack of a domestic flight bound from Alexandria to Cairo. The 60 passengers and crew were released unharmed, but the hijacker surrendered to police at an airport in Cyprus. He was found to be carrying fake explosives. Now, the hijacker's motives remain pretty unclear at this point, but the president of Cyprus says the incident was not terrorism related. Officials say they think the man is psychologically unstable. Reports say he initially asked to speak with his Cypriot ex-wife, who police actually brought to that airport, before making what they say was a series of incoherent demands. Egypt says it has taken steps to overhaul its lax airport security after a Russian passenger jet was blown up over the Sinai Peninsula in October of last year.
Officials in Cyprus.
Well, those are stories we've been following on this Wednesday lunchtime here in Seoul. Just a reminder that if you are a Korean living abroad who is registered to vote in the general election, overseas voting does start today. So go and exercise your hard-fought democratic right to have a say in South Korea's political future. And another reminder that you'll be able to follow all the election results and reaction as it happens here on Arirang News. Of course, Election Day is on April 13th, exactly 2 weeks away from now. Well, for now, that's all we have for our noon newscast here on Arirang TV. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow. So until then, goodbye.